June 12, 1992. Nürburgring. 100,000 of the most devoted fans had gathered in the Green Hell to witness a legendary showdown between Johnny Cecotto's BMW and Klaus Ludwig's Mercedes, a man widely known as the King of the Nordschleife. It was a battle not only between two extraordinary drivers, but between the final evolutions of two completely different philosophies of performance. On one side stood the lightweight, razor-sharp BMW M3 Sport Evolution, a machine engineered around balance, precision, and pure driving finesse. On the other was the low-slung, brutally planted Mercedes-Benz 190e 2.516 Evolution II, wearing a wild aerodynamic body kit, a deep front splitter that looked almost like a snowplow, aggressive widened arches, and a massive rear wing towering like a bar counter, all designed to generate maximum grip and absolute stability at the limit. Flat out, they storm onto Döttinger Höhe, the longest straight of the Nordschleife. One tiny mistake, and Klaus Ludwig briefly loses the position, but it's not over yet. Final lap. Ludwig dives into the slipstream, barely a meter behind. Then, just before the bridge, he suddenly pulls out the left. They thunder down the straight like a single machine, neither willing up to give even an inch. And just before the final Hohenheim chicane, Ludwig edges ahead by only a few meters. But that was enough. This was more than just a victory. It was the turning point of the entire season. For the first time, it became clear. The title Stuttgart had been chasing for years was finally within reach. Years of development, countless iterations, a gradual evolution from the earliest versions to the Evo I, and finally the Evo II. Every detail, every line of the bodywork was the result of Mercedes, AMG and Cosworth pushing relentlessly toward perfection. German engineering precision, racing experience, and the British School of Engine Building came together in a single machine. One designed to reach the absolute limit of what was possible. A machine that would bring Mercedes to the top of DTM for the very first time, while also strengthening its alliance with AMG, a partnership that would eventually become an inseparable part of the brand's entire motorsport identity, the foundation of the Silver Arrow's legacy as we know it today. And before it became this weapon, there was still a long road ahead. As Mercedes-Benz likes to tell the story, the idea of creating a smaller sedan was first mentioned at the Geneva Motor Show in March 1973. But at the time, it was little more than a vague concept, with no clear vision yet of what this new Mercedes was supposed to become. By the end of the same year, however, Stuttgart's attention shifted to a far more serious problem. In October, the OPEC countries announced an oil embargo. Oil prices nearly quadrupled, inevitably driving fuel costs sharply upward. And for Mercedes, one thing became clear. Cars with high fuel consumption would soon become much harder to sell. So, by autumn of 1976, the compact sedan project was officially launched under the internal designation W201. Development was entrusted to Werner Breitschwerdt, an engineer known for his innovative thinking and one of the key figures behind the development of the ABS system. The task facing the engineers was almost impossible. The new car had to preserve everything that defined the brand: exceptional build quality, maximum safety, comfort, and reliability worthy of the flagship S-Class. Yet at the same time, it needed to become lighter, more compact, and more fuel efficient. Reduce everything without losing anything. The design was entrusted to Bruno Sacco. An Italian by birth, Sacco had been with the company since 1958 and was already beginning to define Mercedes-Benz's new design language. Sharp lines, clean surfaces, carefully refined aerodynamics free from unnecessary decoration. every detail served a purpose, right down to the asymmetrical mirrors, designed specifically to reduce aerodynamic drag. But beneath the restrained silhouette hid far more sophisticated engineering. The chassis was developed entirely from scratch, with rigidity and safety as top priorities. The suspension was entirely new, and the M102 engine family, covering displacements from 2.0 to 2.5 liters, was engineered with considerable headroom for future development. When the engineers finally completed their work, only one question still remained. What should the new model be called? Mercedes' traditional naming system, based on engine displacement, was already being used for the W123 lineup, and finding the right designation for the new compact sedan proved far more difficult than expected. In the end, Mercedes' marketing team made a simple decision. The model would be called simply the 190. And it was under that name that the new compact sedan was officially unveiled to the world's press on December 8, 1982, during an event in Andalusia, southern Spain. While journalists were out testing the cars, the first production cars were already on their way to dealerships. And just one day later, the 190 officially went on sale. Overall, the reaction to the new model, quickly nicknamed the Baby Benz, was positive. Of course, there were skeptics who dismissed it as not a real Mercedes, but inside the company, such criticism caused little concern. Even during development, Mercedes' marketing team had clearly defined the target audience: buyers under 30 years old. The new car was meant to attract owners of compact BMWs, smaller Audi models, as well as the Saab 900, and it soon became obvious that the best way to capture a younger audience was through motorsport. But the company's relationship with motorsport was complicated. After the horrific tragedy at Le Mans in 1955, when Pierre Leveg's 300 SLR flew into the crowd, killing 84 people and injuring more than 120, the company effectively imposed an unspoken ban on motorsport involvement. From that point on, any idea of returning to racing was treated in Stuttgart with extreme caution. Nevertheless, by the late 1970s, Mercedes had begun achieving some success in motorsport through private teams, with the rally performance of the SLC proving especially notable. And it was rallying, in fact, that management initially saw as the safest path for the brand's gradual return to competition. The 190 appeared to be the perfect foundation. Compact, lightweight, and well-balanced, it was seen as a potential rival to cars like the Ford Escort and the Talbot Sunbeam Lotus. But for that idea to become reality, Mercedes needed a truly sporting engine. Development was entrusted to the British firm Cosworth Engineering, widely regarded as masters of high-revving four-valve engines. This was the same company behind the legendary Ford Cosworth DFV. As a starting point, they chose the largest engine then available in the 190 lineup, a 2.3-liter inline-4. Cosworth developed an entirely new DOHC cylinder head with 4 valves per cylinder. The engine also received a dry sump lubrication system and Kugelfischer fuel injection, allowing it to produce more than 300 horsepower. But even before the project could fully take shape, the plans had to change. At the 1980 Geneva Motor Show, Audi unveiled the Quattro, a turbocharged, all-wheel drive machine that would fundamentally change the future of world rallying. It quickly became obvious that a rear-wheel drive 190 simply would not be able to compete at that level. Yet the idea of a 16-valve engine had already taken root. Mercedes had no intention of leaving that territory to independent tuning companies, so the project was redirected instead. A new concept was born: to create a car for Group A touring car racing. Development of the performance version moved rapidly. Less than a year after the debut of the standard 190, a batch of 5 pre-production cars was assembled at the Sindelfingen plant. 3 of them were sent to the Nardo circuit in Italy to attempt endurance speed records. 18 drivers rotated behind the wheel as the cars ran continuously for 8 days and nights without stopping. The results were remarkable. 12 international records and an average speed of nearly 248 kilometers an hour. It was a carefully calculated demonstration of the company's engineering capabilities. And it worked. The 190E 2.316 caused a sensation when it was unveiled at the Frankfurt Motor Show in September. Its name perfectly captured the essence of the car, but it proved too long for everyday use. So it quickly became known simply as the Cosworth Mercedes, especially in the UK, or just the 16-valve 190E. In road-going form, the engine produced 185 horsepower, an outstanding figure for its time. The car received a full aerodynamic body kit and looked exactly like a new generation sporting Mercedes should. Understanding that the excitement surrounding the car would eventually fade, Mercedes decided to remind the public about the 16-valve model once again before sales officially began. In the summer of 1984, for the opening of the newly rebuilt Nürburgring, the company organized the now legendary Race of Champions, a one-make event featuring identical pre-production 190E 2.316s. The biggest attraction was the driver lineup: Niki Lauda, Alain Prost, Keke Rosberg, James Hunt, and other stars of world motorsport. But in a surprise result, victory went to a young Brazilian driver, Ayrton Senna. It was one of the first moments that truly drew the attention of the racing world to his name. These were bold statements, records, demonstrations of engineering excellence. But it still wasn't enough. True success in motorsport is born only through competition. And to prove what the 190 was truly capable of, Mercedes had to go racing and face rivals on equal terms. In the early 1980s, German motorsport was entering a period of major transformation. The country's premier touring car championship, Deutsche Rennsport-Meisterschaft, had changed its philosophy and moved toward Group C prototypes. But as speeds increased, so did the costs. The cars were becoming dramatically more expensive, while grid sizes began shrinking rapidly. At the same time, interest was quickly growing around the German Racing Trophy Series, where the relatively affordable Group A touring cars, modified production-based cars, went head-to-head. In response to this shift, the German Motorsport Federation, ONS, decided to create an entirely new championship. And so, in 1984, the Deutsche Produktionswagen Meisterschaft, or simply DTM, was born. Right from its very first season, the series proved highly successful. The straightforward regulations quickly attracted dozens of competitors and several manufacturers at once: Rover, BMW, Alfa Romeo, Volvo, Ford, and Chevrolet. And thanks to a handicap system, where more powerful cars were made heavier and faced tire restrictions, while weaker cars benefited from lower weight, wildly different machines were suddenly able to compete on nearly equal terms. Mercedes approached the new series cautiously. On May 1, 1985, the 5,000th 190E 2.316 rolled off the production line. And that same month, the car finally received Group A homologation. The homologation came rather late for a proper preparation program ahead of the season, but just a month later, Hartmann Motorsport had already prepared the car for privateer driver Leopold Kalina. At the same time, in the French Championship, the Snowbeck Racing Service team quickly became one of the standout contenders. With support from Mercedes-Benz France, they pushed the cars to around 240 horsepower. Despite reliability issues, the team enjoyed a strong debut season, and Alain Cudini ultimately finished third in the championship. The following year, in 1986, the series came under the control of ITR, led by Hans Werner Aufreit, head of AMG, and was renamed DTM, Deutsche Tourenwagenmeisterschaft. AMG is still an independent tuning company at that time, prepared 2 cars for the Austrian Marco RSM team, owned by Dr. Helmut Marko. Their lead driver was Volker Weidler. 2 more cars were entered by Scuderia Kassel, with Jörg van Omen driving one of them. And the 5th Mercedes on the DTM grid was once again fielded by Leopold Gallina. From the very first races, the cars fielded by Marco RSM showed serious potential. In May, at the Avus circuit in Berlin, the teams secured an impressive 1-2 finish, after which rival teams even demanded ballast penalties for the 190s. The organizers rejected the proposal. By the middle of the season, Mercedes had become the benchmark everyone else was chasing. But in the end, Volker Weidler finished second in the championship, losing out only to Kurt Timm in the Rover Vitesse. Everything changed dramatically in 1987. The BMW M3 E30 arrived in the championship, and the level of competition immediately intensified. Harold Gross won the opening round in a BMW, and by the end of the season, the title went to Eric van der Poel, also driving a BMW M3. Despite the disappointing season, one detail stood out. Senior Mercedes-Benz executives were now regularly appearing in the paddock, closely observing the success of the private teams and clearly preparing for a far greater involvement in the years ahead. The pressure from BMW proved decisive. Even before the start of the 1988 season, Mercedes decided to significantly increase its support for the DTM teams. Stuttgart began actively recruiting specialists straight from the paddock. The irony was that many of them were already connected to the company in one way or another. Engineer Bernd Ramler, for example, was involved in camshaft development at Mercedes during the week, while on weekends he helped Gallina Racing develop its DTM 190s. In the end, the company effectively brought people like him into what was rapidly becoming a true factory-backed effort. Together with AMG, engine development work intensified. Thanks to a new throttle system, power output climbed to around 300 horsepower at 8,500 RPM, while torque reached 270 Newton-meters. At the same time, the company was no longer the only manufacturer moving toward full factory-backed involvement. BMW, Ford, and Opel had launched similar programs of their own. No fewer than 16 Mercedes cars appeared on the grid for the 1988 season, with the only 3 remaining fully independent entries. AMG played a central role as the official partner, fielding 5 cars on its own. Marco RSM and Snowbeck Racing also remained key players within the Mercedes camp. The driver lineup was just as impressive. Kurt Timm, Johnny Cecotto, Roland Asch, and many other future stars of the championship. In 1988, the changes affected not only the regulations, but also the DTM race format itself. Each round would now consist of 2 races. As the season progressed, the 190s became increasingly fast and consistent, but their greatest threat came from the turbocharged Ford Sierra RS Cosworths. Their advantage was only reduced after the organizers stepped in and reduced the size of the turbo inlet. Despite this, the season still brought Mercedes several memorable victories. Denis Snowbeck won the second race at the Nürburgring in May, as well as another race in Brno. Johnny Cecotto claimed victory in both races at Avus and repeated the feat again at the Hungaroring in August. But the most consistent performer proved to be Roland Asch, who finished second in the championship, behind Klaus Ludwig in the Ford Sierra. By the 1989 season, Stuttgart approached the challenge with complete seriousness. A new division called Sporttechnik was created, combining the company's DTM and Group C prototype programs.
Realizing that the potential of the 2.316 was nearing its limit, the engineers began developing an entirely new evolution of the 190. At first, a turbocharged version of the 2.316 engine was considered, but in the end, Mercedes chose to focus on a new naturally aspirated 2.5-liter unit instead. And so, the next evolution took shape: the Mercedes-Benz 190e 2.516 Evolution, or simply Evo I, unveiled in Geneva in the spring of 1989. The car received a heavily revised chassis, new aluminum components, and, for the first time in DTM history, 18-inch wheels. Engine output climbed to 315 horsepower, while the car itself became far more aggressive, both visually and technically. To maximize competitiveness, Mercedes focused its efforts around three key teams. AMG, fielded by Kurt Timm, alongside reigning champion Klaus Ludwig, who had been signed away from Ford. Snowbeck Racing entered Denis Snowbeck and Alain Coudini, while MS Jet Racing was represented by Roland Asch and Manuel Reuter. The championship began with BMW drivers dominating in the new second evolution of the M3, winning 5 races across the opening 3 rounds. Ludwig was the only driver able to interrupt the Bavarian streak with a victory at Hockenheim. But shortly afterward, at the Nürburgring, he suffered a major accident when Armin Hannes slammed into his car at nearly 200 kilometers an hour after Ludwig had spun sideways across the track. At Mainz-Finthen, the new Evo I made its winning debut. Roland Asch took victory in the first race, while Kurt Timm won the second in the older spec car. But even then, it was already clear the new car still required constant development work to remain competitive. The second half of the season turned into an intense duel between Ford and BMW, only briefly interrupted near the end of the year by Ludwig's double victories at Diepholz and the Nürburgring after returning from injury. Despite the potential of the Evo I, the 1989 title ultimately went to BMW driver Roberto Ravaglia. Ford put up serious resistance as well, but endless disputes over minimum weights and restrictor regulations ultimately pushed the company out of DTM altogether. Mercedes finished the championship with Kurt Timm only 4th overall. Kurt Timm later recalled that the team carried out an enormous amount of testing in an effort to close the gap. We were testing almost every single day, pushing everything to the limit. Those intensive test sessions were what allowed us to become far more competitive in the second half of the season. We still weren't at 100%, but I felt we had reached about 95% of BMW's potential. The fierce rivalry between Mercedes and BMW quickly turned DTM into one of the most talked about touring car championships in the world. And although Ford had left the series, a new rival immediately stepped in to take its place: Audi. Their car, powered by a 3.6-liter V8, was equipped with all-wheel drive, instantly triggering a wave of protests from the other teams. Norbert Haug was appointed to lead Mercedes' factory DTM program, a former motorsport journalist who would soon become one of the central figures behind the return of the Silver Arrows to top-level motorsport. The company once again fielded 3 factory-backed teams, with Kurt Timm and Klaus Ludwig remaining its lead drivers. Mercedes began the season with the Evo I, but on May 1st, the new Mercedes-Benz 190e 2.516 Evolution 2 was officially homologated. The Evo II looked like something from another era: a deep front splitter, widened fenders, and a massive rear wing. Today, this kind of aerodynamics feels perfectly normal, but back then Mercedes was one of the pioneers. And most importantly, it worked. At speeds of around 100 kilometers an hour, the drivers could already feel significant downforce, while at higher speeds the car seemed to glue itself to the track. As the season progressed, engine output climbed from 330 to 360 horsepower, aided in part by Formula One grade fuel. Another key advantage was the ABS system, which allowed drivers to brake later and attack corners with greater confidence. Unfortunately, the season turned out to be a difficult one for Mercedes. The team struggled with bad luck and ongoing balance issues. As the championship entered its final stages, it seemed the title would go to Johnny Cecotto in the BMW. But Audi executed its team tactics perfectly. By entering more cars for the closing rounds, they ultimately secured the championship, with Hans Stuck taking the title. The 1991 season only intensified the battle. Audi and Opel introduced updated evolutions of their cars, now featuring splitters and rear wings similar to those seen on the Evo II. This time, the 190s were genuinely competitive. After a difficult start to the championship, Klaus Ludwig won both races at the Nürburgring, while in the summer, Kurt Timm and Roland Asch delivered strong performances at the Norrisring. Mercedes looked especially dominant at the Nürburgring in September, where the factory cars swept the entire podium. But even that was not enough. Throughout the season, Mercedes and BMW repeatedly pushed for heavier ballast penalties for Audi, but the organizers rejected the protests. Meanwhile, Audi continued to execute its team strategy flawlessly during the final rounds of the championship and ultimately secured a second consecutive title. Their champion, Frank Biela, was likely especially satisfied considering he had previously left Mercedes for Audi. The 1992 season marked the final year contested under Group A regulations and the weight handicap system. The rules still largely followed Group A principles, but teams were now given greater freedom in engine development. Audi pushed that freedom a little too far and withdrew from the championship midway through the season after its 180-degree crankshaft was declared illegal. Opel also stepped away from DTM, choosing instead to focus on developing the Opel Calibra for the upcoming Class 1 regulations. As a result, the championship battle came down entirely to Mercedes and BMW. That only made the racing even more intense. The two manufacturers were almost perfectly matched, and at times, the outcome of an entire race weekend came down to tire choice alone. Mercedes was pushing development harder than anyone else, as Stuttgart was determined to finally secure the long-awaited championship title. The 190e 2.516 Evo II received a sequential X-Track gearbox, a new braking system, and a 4-channel Bosch ABS unit, as well as power steering, following Audi's example. Engine output reached around 373 horsepower at 9,500 RPM. Some sources claim the engines could rev as high as 10,200 RPM, making it no surprise that engine life was measured in only a few hundred kilometers. As Klaus Ludwig later recalled, for 3 years we had no power steering, which honestly felt like a disaster. Because of the large caster angle on the front axle, the steering effort was enormous. When the car stepped out into a slide, it took a huge force to pull it back straight. The 1992 car with power steering was the best car we ever had. It felt completely different to drive. You could attack the curbs aggressively in ways you never would have dared before. The men from the three-pointed star began the championship in dominant fashion. Surprisingly, however, it was not the factory-backed AMG squads, struggling with their Bridgestone tires, but Zach Speed on Michelin's that set the pace. Kurt Timm won both races at Zolder. Roland Asch took victory at the Nürburgring. And later, Jörg van Omen, together with 1982 Formula One world champion Keke Rosberg, added more victories for Mercedes at Wunstorf. After just a third of the season, Mercedes drivers occupied the top 4 positions in the championship standings. At Hockenheim, Ellen Lohr became the first woman ever to win a DTM race, while Asch claimed victory in the second race. and at the Nordschleife, Ludwig defeated Johnny Cecotto's BMW twice in one of the most iconic battles of the era. With so much attention focused on Audi's withdrawal, BMW's strong results at the Norrisring received far less attention. The Bavarians looked even stronger at Brno, where Cecotto claimed 2 victories. Still, at the following rounds, the balance shifted back once again. Ludwig won both races at the Diepholz Airfield circuit, while Schneider triumphed on the streets of Singen. Ludwig and Schneider also added 1 Nürburgring victory each to Mercedes' growing tally. Heading into the Hockenheim finale, only Mercedes drivers remained in contention for the title. Ludwig holding a comfortable lead with 216 points, Schneider with 191, and mathematically, Tim with 177. But BMW still managed to spoil the celebration for its rivals. Roberto Ravaglia won both races on experimental Yokohama tires. Even so, Klaus Ludwig secured the championship in the very first race. Tim overtook Schneider in the battle for second overall, while Cecotto finished as the best of the rest. And with that, Mercedes finally captured the title it had been chasing since the very beginning of its DTM journey. The 1992 season became the culmination of years of relentless development, setbacks, and constant evolution, the final chapter of the Group A era, and the moment the Silver Arrows finally rose to the summit of touring car racing. The 1993 season opened a new chapter in DTM history. Audi's departure was undoubtedly a serious blow, but the organizers remained optimistic about the future. Alfa Romeo was entering the championship, and the new Class 1 regulations were intended to finally put an end to the endless disputes and protests. BMW, however, also chose to leave the series, despite already having a new car based on the E36 M3 nearly ready to race. The decision came after ONS refused to allow the company to move its inline-6 engine further back in the chassis, a layout that was clearly disadvantaged against the V engines used by its rivals. At Mercedes, the entire focus had been placed on securing the 1992 title, to the point that development of a new Class 1 C-Class had effectively been sacrificed. But leaving DTM was never truly an option. Instead, the company chose a compromise solution: to contest the transitional 1993 season with heavily updated Evo IIs adapted to the new Class 1 regulations. But the outcome was almost inevitable. A transitional car was never going to compete on equal terms against cars designed from the outset around the new regulations. The scarlet Alfa Romeo 155 V6 TIs were faster, more advanced, and soon became the symbol of a new era. Yet, just 1 year later, Mercedes-Benz returned with a fully developed C-Class and reclaimed its place at the top. DTM itself was changing rapidly. Simple, production-based touring cars were giving way to increasingly complex engineering machines hidden beneath familiar silhouettes. A new era was beginning, and the Mercedes-Benz 190E would forever remain the car that brought that golden age to a close, loudly, confidently, and without the slightest doubt.